It has been 4 days now. Search efforts for the evening are done. And please say, no new reports.
I hope they find her. We've got to think about the family, and we've got to think about this little girl that's out missing.
A mother wakes up on a quiet Saturday morning, the sun barely brushing the mountain, and the house is still. For a brief moment, everything feels ordinary, almost peaceful, but that calm disappears when she walks into her 5-year-old's bedroom and finds the bed empty, the blankets cold, and the front door standing wide open. She checks the yard. She searches the street. She calls her daughter's name again and again until her voice gives out, but the only answer is silence. This is the story of Elizabeth Shelley, a little girl whose light touched everyone around her, and what unfolded next would leave an entire community asking how something so unthinkable could happen so close to home. Elizabeth Jessica Shelley, known lovingly as Lizzie, entered the world on December 10th, 2013, in Utah. She was welcomed by her mother, Jessica Whipple, said her father, Wes Shelley. Those who knew Lizzie described her as bright and thoughtful, with a playful spark that seemed to follow her everywhere. She adored simple treasures, gathering wildflowers, wandering through the outdoors, and pointing out rainbows as if they were personal gifts from the sky. In the years that followed, her biological father was no longer closely involved, and Lizzie was raised in Logan, Utah, alongside her mother, Jessica's fiancé, Dietrich Black, and her baby sister, Maddie. Her days were meant to be filled with imagination and comfort, the kind every 5-year-old deserves. On Saturday morning, May 25, 2019, the routine of the household shifted in a way no one expected. At around 9:30 a.m., Jessica stepped into Lizzie's bedroom to see if she was awake for the plans they had made. Instead of sleepy excitement, and an unsettling silence greeted her. The front door stood open, and Lizzie was nowhere to be found. A frantic search unfolded inside and outside the home, each passing minute bringing more confusion than answers. It was soon realized that 21-year-old Alex Whipple was also missing. His skateboard and phone had been left behind, an odd detail that made the situation even more puzzling, as if someone had stepped out briefly and forgotten the basics. What began as an ordinary morning quickly became the start of a deeply concerning mystery, one that would call for urgent help and careful investigation. It was later clarified that Alex did not reside in the home, though he had spent that particular night there, resting on the living room couch. Earlier in the evening, a message had been sent to Jessica through Facebook, and an invitation to stop by had been extended. He arrived around 10 p.m., by which time both Lizzie and her little sister were already tucked in for the night. The adults remained awake for a while, passing time with video games and casual drinks, unaware that the hours would soon be revisited in careful detail by investigators. Around midnight, Jessica headed to her room, but first slipped quietly into Lizzie's bedroom to kiss her goodnight. Lizzie was asleep, dressed in a teal skirt trimmed with white lace and a red holiday-themed tank top, an outfit that reflected her bright personality. A short time later, near 1 a.m., Dietrich also checked on her before going to bed. She appeared peaceful and undisturbed, and no one in that home could have imagined that such an ordinary night, one filled with routine comforts and small gestures of love, would later be examined with heartbreaking significance. By mid-afternoon at approximately 3 p.m., Alex was located by officers in a remote area outside town. He appeared unsettled and distant when approached. Questions were asked calmly at first. His name, why he was there. The cooperation was not immediately given. He hesitated to identify himself, challenging the need for it, while officers explained that a missing child investigation was underway. The exchange quickly became firm and direct. Instructions were repeated, and when compliance did not come easily, he was detained. What began as a simple request for identification turned into a tense moment shaped by urgency, where investigators were not focused on inconvenience. They were focused on a 5-year-old little girl who should have been home. Perhaps still talking about rainbows and weekend plans, instead of becoming the center of a search effort. At the time he was found, several items were in his possession, including a baseball bat associated with harmful controlled substances and a 24-ounce can of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, the same brand consumed the night before. Another empty can of that beer had reportedly been discovered near the family's garage by a neighbor, a detail that would later be documented carefully. These pieces, while ordinary on their own, became significant when placed within the larger timeline investigators were building. Small objects can sometimes speak loudly, even when the people involved choose not to. Although he initially declined to provide identification, officers confirmed who he was and placed him under arrest for violating probation terms connected to prior serious charges involving assaultive behavior, theft, and controlled substances. He was transported to the Logan City Police Department for questioning. During processing, officers observed visible concerns on his hands and noticeable staining on his clothing and wristwatch. These observations were preserved as evidence and would later be analyzed, ultimately linking back to Lizzie. While waiting alone in the interview room, he was seen rubbing and licking his hands repeatedly, as though attempting to tidy away something that could not simply be wiped clean. It was a small, unsettling detail, one that investigators would not ignore. In the early stages of questioning, on his account shifted. At first it was stated that he had not been at his sister's home the previous evening, suggesting the last visit had occurred days earlier. That timeline soon changed again to weeks. When asked directly about seeing Jessica, he acknowledged contact the day before, but minimized it. He indicated that he had been around town and briefly in their company, yet claimed the children had not been present. Each revision was carefully noted. In investigations like this, consistency matters, and inconsistencies tend to stand out. As questioning continued, he eventually admitted to being at the residence the night before. He described drinking with Jessica and Dietrich before deciding to leave for a walk in the early morning hours, saying he wanted to give the couple privacy. The explanation carried an almost awkward tone, as though an uncomfortable family moment had been the most pressing concern of the night. Yet investigators were focused elsewhere. He maintained that he had not seen Lizzie when he left and insisted he did not know her whereabouts. When informed that his niece was missing and feared harmed, his demeanor shifted between frustration and disbelief. He expressed concern, stating he hoped she would be found safe, while also questioning why he was being held instead of searching. For officers, however, the priority was clear. Understanding exactly what had happened to a little girl whose world should have been filled with safety, not uncertainty. During questioning, Alex was asked about the open front door and why his skateboard and phone had been left behind. He responded that he simply did not need them and could not explain the details. It was difficult not to notice the contradiction. Most people do not wander off without the very items that connect them to the world. At another point, he spoke at length about how unfair life had been to him and how misunderstood he felt within his own family. He also volunteered that when he consumed alcohol, he would sometimes lose awareness and later find himself in legal trouble, though he avoided specifics. Despite these statements, he continued to deny knowing what had happened to Lizzie. Investigators were left with more questions than answers, while the focus remained on finding a 5-year-old who should have been safe at home. By Monday, May 27th, 2 days after Lizzie's disappearance, she was still missing. Community concern grew rapidly. Now, when a Facebook page titled Abducted Elizabeth Shelley was created to share updates and coordinate support, law enforcement held a press conference urging anyone with information to come forward. During this time, several items of evidence were recovered near the family's residence. Among them was a kitchen knife located in the parking lot of Bear River Charter School, later confirmed to be missing from Jessica's home. Forensic testing identified traces connected to Lizzie. In that same area, a PVC pipe was discovered bearing a reddish substance and a partial palm print, which was subsequently matched to Alex. Each finding tightened the timeline investigators were assembling. Behind every piece of evidence was the same urgent hope that understanding what happened would bring answers for a little girl whose life should have continued with school days, bedtime stories, and the simple joy of being 5. Roughly 50 yards from where earlier items had been collected, investigators uncovered additional evidence. Partially concealed in the ground was a small teal skirt trimmed in white lace, the same one Lizzie had worn to bed. The discovery was heartbreaking in its simplicity. It was not just fabric. It was a reminder of a child who loved bright colors and bedtime routines. Although Lizzie had not yet been located, authorities stated that the physical evidence gathered so far supported serious charges, including significant charges tied to how Lizzie's remains were handled. Separate from the disappearance, and Alex was also charged with multiple unrelated offenses, including refusing to identify himself, failing to comply with lawful command, possession of harmful controlled substances, and unlawfully carrying as a restricted individual. The legal weight surrounding him was steadily increasing. For several days he chose not to provide further answers. Then, on May 29th, negotiations shifted the course of the case. Prosecutors indicated that the most severe sentencing option would be considered unless cooperation was given. Faced with that possibility, Alex agreed to disclose the location of his niece's remains in exchange for the removal of that penalty from consideration. His attorney later stated that the decision had been made to give the family a measure of closure. Others saw it differently, and noting that the timing aligned closely with self-preservation. In the end, what mattered most was bringing Lizzie home. A 5-year-old who should have been preparing for summer adventures was instead the center of a search that no family ever imagines. After Alex disclosed the location, investigators returned to the area he described. Beneath a tree, in a spot that had previously been checked, Lizzie was located. Earlier searches had not revealed her because she had been concealed below the surface, and at that stage officers were still hoping to find a missing child, not preparing for recovery. The confirmation that she had tragically not survived shifted the case from rescue to accountability. Formal charges were filed, including aggravated murder, obstruction of justice, and additional serious offenses connected to Lizzie's disappearance and the handling of her remains. Court records later referenced medical findings that indicated clear signs of extreme harm. Forensic analysis also confirmed that she had endured a deeply violating act. While the wording in those documents remained clinical and restrained, yet the reality behind them was heartbreaking. A little girl who loved flowers and bedtime kisses had been denied the safety, care, and protection every child should be given. Within the family, attempts were made to understand what could have driven such a tragedy. Alex's grandfather, Bill Whipple, expressed his belief that long-held hurt and unresolved anger may have played a role. It was said that Alex's early years were marked by instability. His mother had left when he was young, and although his father provided care, long hours on the road as a truck driver meant limited supervision. Time had been spent in foster placements, and high school had not been completed. There was also a history of struggles involving harmful controlled substances, periods of homelessness, some prior criminal behavior. None of these factors excused what happened, but they formed part of the background later examined in court. In the end, however, the focus remained where it belonged, on Lizzie, a 5-year-old whose life should have unfolded in school classrooms and summer adventures, not in court transcripts and sentencing hearings. In 2017, Alex had been allowed to stay at his grandfather Bill's home while Bill was out of town. During that time, the house was left in disarray, and several belongings, including a vehicle, were taken without permission. The situation escalated into a lengthy pursuit by Utah State troopers that stretched roughly 40 miles before it came to an end. That incident resulted in probation, which remained active at the time of Lizzie's disappearance. One of the requirements was steady employment. When that condition was no longer met, the probation was considered violated. It was another chapter in a pattern of instability that had already caused strain within the family. Just 2 weeks before Lizzie tragically passed away, Alex had reached out to his sister Jessica asking for help. She agreed to let him stay with her and drove about 30 minutes to Brigham City to bring him back home. It was an act of compassion, one sibling trying to offer support to another. Later, Jessica would share that this decision became a source of lasting sorrow. What was meant to be an opportunity for stability instead became part of a heartbreaking chain of events. In September 2019, Alex accepted a plea agreement. He admitted guilt to 4 of the most serious charges filed against him, including the highest-level homicide count and additional offenses involving a child. In exchange, other charges were dismissed. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a resolution Lizzie's family had hoped would ensure permanent accountability. While the legal process reached its conclusion, the deeper loss remained. A little girl who should have been starting kindergarten and choosing backpacks for school instead became remembered through memorials, photographs, and the quiet determination of her family to keep her name spoken with love. At the sentencing hearing, the judge addressed Alex with words that left little room for interpretation. It was stated that the remainder of his life would be spent behind prison walls, removed from ordinary freedoms most people take for granted. As the court described his actions as deeply disturbing and beyond excuse, family members then approached the podium one by one to share the impact this loss had carried into their lives. Anger and heartbreak were voiced openly, and it was made clear that trust had been shattered in a way that could never be restored. Throughout it all, Alex remained silent, eyes lowered. When invited to speak, no statement was offered. After the proceedings concluded, Lizzie's loved ones gathered outside beneath the open sky. Butterflies were released in her honor, their wings catching the sunlight in a quiet tribute to a child remembered for warmth and brightness. She'd been the kind of little girl who lit up rooms and collected flowers simply because they were pretty. A memorial service was held on June 3, 2019, followed by her funeral the next day. Now she was laid to rest in a small white casket adorned with colorful butterflies and the phrase, "Live like Lizzie." Guests were asked to bring hand-picked flowers, an invitation that reflected the gentle joy she found in simple things. Law enforcement had assured the family that Lizzie would be brought home and properly laid to rest, and that promise was fulfilled. For her loved ones, that mattered. Jessica later shared her belief that her daughter is now at peace, free from hardship, able to flourish in a way that was denied here. The image of a butterfly became a symbol not only of remembrance, but of hope beyond sorrow. Thank you for spending time learning about Elizabeth's life. Questions still linger about what led to that night and whether warning signs were missed. What happened within this family defied expectations. Such harm is often imagined as coming from strangers, not from someone trusted. In court, silence may have been the only response left, because no words could have altered the outcome. If you value thoughtful discussions about real cases and the lessons they carry, consider subscribing and turning on notifications for future stories. Until next time, take care.